show this afternoon, we are going to be talking with people who suffer from various obsessive-compulsive disorders. And what I was saying at the beginning of the show opened, we've all done it. We've all had that nagging doubt, or checked a couple times more than we needed to, or maybe washed our hands more than we knew we had to. But it's for the people who have the obsessive-compulsive disorder that it becomes something that can really ruin their lives. Mary is with us in shadow today. Mary, thank you for being with us. Why is it that, now I would have thought someone in the medical profession would have less concern than anyone to appear here on the couch with me. What is your concern?
Well, it's just of such a personal nature to me, and many of my friends and family members are still not aware that I suffer from this disorder. And I feel that a lot of people, unless they've experienced it themselves or know someone who has, would find it very difficult to understand.
What is the exact nature? I talked about the washing 50 times a day at one point, washing your hands. Is that the extent of it, or is there more involved?
Tom, it was really a grossly exaggerated fear of dirt and disease. The particular behavior that I manifested was the excessive hand washing. But it was also, you know, consuming thoughts of fears of dirt and disease, that I would contaminate someone, that someone else would contaminate me.
Do you think that is almost an outgrowth of working in the medical field?
Well, initially I rationalized my behavior by saying that I've taken too many microbiology courses and I'm just more aware of, you know, how diseases are transmitted.
All you have to see is one of those magnified pictures of a germ to grab the soap, I would think.
Sure, but it became that it was disrupting my life and interfering with my normal life, and I was fearful that it would be passed on to my children, and it got totally out of control.
What was the earliest manifestation of it? When did you first think something might be wrong?
I would say I've essentially lived with this for 15 to 20 years. It became extremely troublesome about 2.5 years ago, to the point that I just felt that if I had to live the rest of my life with this disorder, I really didn't know whether I could do that.
Okay, we'll come right back to you, and feel free as well to get involved in the conversation at any time. Patricia, for you, it came out how?
Well, it came out in early childhood, but then it went into a period of recession, but it came out...
Was it the same thing as Mary? Was it a...
No, it wasn't a cleanliness thing at all. It was a scrupulosity thing. It was related to whether things were right and things were wrong. And I was in 4th grade, and I had my tonsils out, and got into a situation where I couldn't answer yes or no to a question because I was afraid it would be a lie, or I couldn't touch anything of anybody else's or my own because I thought I was stealing something. And we went to the doctor, and it was a pediatrician, and he said, oh yeah, you got an overdose of anesthetic, and that's why you're doing these kinds of things. And so my parents took me home, and I spent about 2 weeks at home, and I realized it was really bothering them as much as it was bothering me. So I just went completely underground.
What was happening at home at that point?
Well, I was just... They were very nervous. They couldn't stop the situation, and they were like concerned parents. You know, here's this child. She's worrying that if I ask her if it's raining outside and she says yes, and it isn't, that she's telling a lie and committing a sin. It had a lot to do...
What did you think would happen? I can understand
Nothing.
In Mary's case, she thought a germ might infect her, but what...
I was in a Catholic school at that point, and I had this ferocious nun who was very arbitrary, and you couldn't do anything right or wrong. So what I had tried to do was adopt my behavior to pleasing her. And this was this coupled with the OCD predisposition that I had just led right to a situation where I couldn't do anything. You know, I couldn't move to the left, I couldn't move to the right. And it all came out as fear of sin instead of fear of germs. It's the same basic fear that Mary was talking about, but it had another objective.
As you got older, you also were concerned in terms of driving a car, that somehow if you didn't keep a lookout for maybe a shard of glass in the road, that someone could get into a terrible accident and it would be your fault.
Well, what happened is that this went underground for a long period of time, very long, through most of my childhood and teenage years and everything. It had some manifestations in sort of an over-concern with religion and things like that, but nothing that anyone noticed, and that's the key word, noticed as being anything different than somebody who was supposedly sensitive, whatever that means. You know, I think that's where we hide a lot of these in the category of this child is very sensitive. But I went through college and grown-up life and was practicing law, and law is a very obsessive-compulsive profession. A lot of professions, you know, have components to it that do this. And I found myself checking and rechecking all the cases that I was doing and the briefs that I was writing, and it just got worse and worse. I would get up in the middle of the night, drive down to my office, and check it out. And finally I said to myself...
Did you have kids?
Yeah, I had kids. One kid's in the office, I mean in the audience right now, and her brother. And I would get up, and sometimes I would go by myself when they were sleeping, or if it was, you know, 7 or 8 o'clock at night, I'd say, you got to get in the car, I got to go down and check this file to see if I did something wrong in it. And I started to realize at that point that this wasn't just concerned with a job. This was, it's like with Mary, you know, she starts out in its germs in nursing, and I'm all of a sudden doing this with my profession. First place, it looks like over-concern or lack of self-confidence or maybe just incompetence. And all of a sudden you realize there's something very, very wrong. This has nothing to do with the job. So I went on a vacation, and within 3 days, the symptoms that had been localized on worrying about whether the things in my job were right or wrong, and that I could rationalize the same way Mary was saying as being a component of my job, had just globalized into everything. And that's when I started doing things like, if I saw glass on the street, I would have to stop the car, go out and pick up the glass, or if I was walking by, pick up the glass, because I was afraid that somebody was going to get hurt.
Is there part of your brain, Sandra, and I want to find out about your particular manifestation of this, is there part of your brain telling you, this isn't right, that I should just stop this?
Yes, most of the time I did not want to do it, and I was very aware of, well, I was washing, checking, I had verbal rituals. I also would ride back in my car to see if I hit anybody, and I could
Even though
drive.
you logically knew that you had.
I knew,
Yeah.
I would know. I said, I should know if I hit someone, but the fear that I was just so afraid I was going to hurt someone.
Now, what's a verbal ritual?
Before I started washing, I had certain things I had to say, certain sentences. I was constantly apologizing. I was constantly confessing. And this was right before I began washing. The washing came on about 1.5 years ago, and I'm pretty certain I know how it came on, and it was something that definitely did happen. I had an accident, and because of that, I feel that kicked off the washing, and then the washing, and then that kicked off the checking. And because now I'm on medication, I'm on clomipramine, and without even trying in behavior therapy, I'm almost completely cured. I still am in behavior therapy, and I have one more major part of my illness as far as where I do a lot of washing and have a lot of rituals, which is in the bathroom. That's yet to come. I've sort of been pushing that away. I don't
Your
really
showers, you would shower for how long?
half an hour, and it was never enough. I was never clean, and I brought my father into it. I made him be out in the living room because I knew I wouldn't get out. And he'd say 10 minutes, and then we'd have a fight every morning.
You had to shut the water off in the house at one point, didn't he?
He shut the water off in the house a couple of times on me because there was just so much washing. I was afraid, like Mary, I was contaminated, and that I would contaminate people by touching things.
Does this sound familiar to anybody out there? How many, raise your hand if you could, so we can get a sense. Anybody who, this type of compulsive nature? Okay, a couple people out there.
You know, Tom, what's interesting in that Sandy and I were talking about, and that all of us, when we found each other, have found that there are some manifestations that show up all of a sudden out of, with no background for it, like the car thing Sandy and I both have. And the first time I was being treated, I met somebody else with OCD. She had the same thing. There was this absolute incredible thing that comes over you that you believe that you hit somebody with a car. And it's the same thing. It's almost as if you were programmed, and yet there's no Freudian or anything predisposition that anybody
What's
can
going
find.
on, Mary? What's going on with your family and friends as they become aware that something's not quite right?
Well, for a long time I tried to hide it, and then the behavior became so blatant that I couldn't. And it was obviously a very stressful situation between my husband and I, because he couldn't understand this. And I was driving him crazy, and he saw I was driving myself crazy, and it was a very difficult situation.
We have to take a break. I want to talk more about how your family members get drawn into this behavior as well, and we'll talk with a couple more people who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorders, including Debbie, whom you met during the show open, who believed that depending on what color dress she wore, she might be provoked into committing some crime. And also, Ernie will be with us, who did stand in front of a locked door for half an hour, not believing it was locked, and he'll be with us. Stay with us. OCD today. OCD is short for obsessive compulsive disorders, and we're talking with people who've, in varying degrees, depending on their therapy and the nature of it, have suffered and are suffering from them. Joining us on the panel now, Ernie Lillo, who has an obsessive compulsive disorder. He didn't sleep for more than an hour a night for months because he was obsessed with security, whether the house was secure. And Debbie Kelly, whose disorder manifests itself with superstition. And yours, Debbie, is a little bit different from most that I've read about. I hadn't read many of the superstition nature.
Mine's more diversified. It isn't in one specific area, though sometimes it can be. It takes on different forms. It depends on the seconds, the minutes, the hours. It started out when I was little. I always was afraid to be left alone, even just to go to school, and if my mother wasn't there, I would just be in a panic, just for 5 minutes if she was late. Like,
had anything happened that would...
No, not at all, nothing. But then when I was about 7, I could never sleep, and that's when it really began to get a lot worse. I used to go downstairs and check all the cabinets to make sure they were all securely shut. And that was the compulsion telling me if I did this. I always call it like it's another person, but it's really me.
Does that feel,
it's like a little girl.
That's very interesting, yeah. Do any of you feel like it's like you're possessed or you're inhabited by somebody else? Or?
Yes, I did. I felt I wasn't doing it. It was doing it. It moved in and took over my whole being, and it was doing it to me. I wasn't doing it to it. It drove me to wash, and I didn't want to be washing. My hands broke out. They got split open from the soap and looked like prickly heat around my wrist because I washed
So
up
you're
to my
able to
elbows.
see that obviously I'm doing damage to myself.
Oh, yes.
I'm achieving the
stop
opposite end of what I intended.
You're not wanting to do any of these things.
No.
It's been compared to the compulsions to take drugs, but the one difference is that there's absolutely no pleasure out of this. You're not saying, I want to do this like I want to eat a candy bar or something. You don't want to do it. But the anxiety and the physical feeling of the need and the need to relieve yourself of this terrible, terrible physical anxiety is what it's all about. You don't want to do the things. You want to escape from this anxiety that takes over and that you're
Somehow
trying to get away
by
from.
doing it, it'll be over.
If I do this, this anxiety will decrease. If I check this, then I know for sure it will be.
It relieves the tension.
But so you would be paralyzed by what color dress to wear and what
Then
happened?
it got, after I, it took on different forms according to where I was in my life. It changes according to the age you are. And eventually it got into, what color dress I would wear. If I wore this color, then if I wore red, I would kill someone. And then it would change the next day. If I wore a different color, I would gain weight. So sometimes I would have about 5 obsessions at once. So in the end, you just have to take the worst one, the one with the worst fear out of all of them. And at one point, about robbing a bank, that is an awful feeling, to go into a bank and, you're at the teller and you're making a transaction and you really think that she's on the phone calling someone to come and take you away.
She knows what's inside your...
Yeah, like you're going to be locked up and you're saying, oh my God, and you're just like... feel like you're going to go to prison or something for something you never even did.
Ernie, does your compulsion, did it manifest itself outside the home at all, or was it solely that desire to make sure everything was secure on the home front?
No, for me it was solely a personal and family-orientated obsession. It was just my own house, my own car, my own personal stuff. And going back to what they were saying about the feeling, see, I didn't want to do it. I felt it was some kind of penance for some evil thing that I did in my life, that I was paying some kind of penance, and for that.
There's a common thread. You all
having this disease.
You all sound like you thought you deserved it somehow.
Well,
is
not
that
necessarily that we
I felt like I deserved
it, but that it was something from something we'd done, with something we did because we didn't want it.
It was
it's
a
nothing
payoff.
that we wanted. I mean, I hated doing it. I used to sit in my living room, and the main obsession at the beginning was a cellar door. And I would sit and try to watch TV, try to relax, but this thought kept being there. You have to check the cellar door. And until I checked it, I would have to suffer. So it was like, I may as well check it, get it over with, and then at least I could relax. And so I could sleep. And if I didn't check things, I wouldn't be able to sleep.
But it wasn't enough just to check it.
No,
and
it
say,
doesn't stop from there. It will still keep you doing it over and over
The
again.
problem with the checking is, and one of the reasons that they think that it's serotonin, is that you can, you know, you were saying...
Now explain what serotonin is.
Serotonin is a chemical in the brain that is sort of floods, and it's one of the theories. Dr. Jenike could probably explain it better. It seems that there are receptors, neuron receptors, that are supposed to take this serotonin up in a reuptake, and it doesn't. And to me, it sounds like it's a flood in the brain. It sort of stops the thought from going through. And what happens is you go to check something, and you get to the point where say it's that you removed an electric plug, you actually put your fingers down and you touch the thing, and you go, but your memory is not doing what you suggested when you think. You go back, you know, in the opening segment you said you go back and check to see if you put the iron off. Usually when you do that, you can run through that whole series of events in your mind and say, yeah, I had to because that's the way it is. But your mind stops. And even if you end up like Ernie standing in front of the door because you're memorizing things that ordinarily you'd have a sensual response to, so that later on you could say, yes, I saw the door closed, yes, I felt this, and yes, I did
Ernie,
that.
as you were standing there in front of this locked door,
right.
Once you knew it was locked, you still weren't able to leave it.
Well, I knew it was locked, just like I knew things were unplugged. I knew the stove was off. I knew the refrigerator was shut, et cetera, et cetera. But it was just, my mind kept saying, are you sure? Are you sure? There was something that just kept drawing me toward it, that I had to be absolutely sure, and I guess that's what it has to do with also that chemical or whatever.
What was your wife
Because
doing
until my mind was satisfied that this was done, and sometimes it took a half hour, sometimes it took 3 hours.
Really?
Until my mind said, okay, yes, it's done. Until that clicked. I mean, however long it took.
We started to talk about bringing other family members into it. It's got to be inevitable that they are impacted somehow. And did you turn to your wife and hope that she would validate what you were doing somehow, that she would come in on it with you?
Well, I turned to my wife, and originally she didn't know. I tried to hide it, and I didn't really know myself. I kind of thought I was odd. I was the only person who had this disorder. I was alone. And but I found out now that there's so many people. But originally, I mean, and she kind of thought, you know, it was just a quirk. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people. They just think it's a quirk, but, you know, it's really not. So I tried, and then it got worse and worse, and I tried to seek her help and talk to her, but then she thought I was crazy. And
did you want her help to come along and check these things with you, or did you say, I think something's wrong with me, let's talk about it?
Well, I thought something was wrong with me, and she kind of said, you could just push it out of your mind. You could do it. It's nothing. Just ignore it. Try and avoid it.
What was the breaking point for you?
Well, when it came to the point where I was standing in front of a door and really, like, going crazy and just saying, hey, there's something wrong with me. Why do I have to check this 50 times? And I knew it was locked. I knew it was locked, but I just couldn't pull myself to believe it.
In terms of your relationship is what I'm going for, though.
Well, we started to have arguments. We started to get violent toward each other because I wanted help, and she kind of, you know, used to prevent me, get in my way, say, hey, don't check it, try to push me away. And then we started to really break apart and just resent each other.
This has got to be. Now you're divorced, but you don't attribute
No,
this
not at
to
all.
that
I don't think so. It goes back right into childhood, to the earliest memories. And there are a lot of things that you do that people who have OCD do from compulsion that other people do normally, so no one notices it. I think there are certain stress points in your life, and I don't think there's so much the ones that people categorize as stress points. I think there are different things, maybe adolescence and stuff.
I want to talk more about how your spouses in all your cases got involved in this. When we come back, Dr. Jenike, Michael Jenike, whom you heard referred to, will join us, and we'll try to find out whether this is a behavioral thing, whether it's something you can just through meditation or relaxation therapy, you can change it, or whether, like Tourette syndrome, if you recall the show we did several months ago, it is a neurological, biochemical thing that you can stop with just therapy. Right after this. Talking about obsessive-compulsive disorders on the show. You may hear that referred to as OCD occasionally in the Balance of the Show. I want to mention Patricia Perkins is the heads the National OCD Foundation, and we will have information about that before the show is over today. Joining us, Dr. Michael Jenike, who is Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, works at the OCD Clinic at Mass General Hospital. And the major forms of this disorder that we're hearing thus far, with Debbie's exception of the superstition coming in, are the cleaning and the checking. People are either obsessive about making sure they have no germs, or they're checking things like making sure the door is locked or the cabinets are shut. Is that the way it tends to manifest itself in most people?
I think the patients have done an exceptional job of outlining sort of the clinical syndrome that we see. Probably the biggest group of patients we see are washers, people that wash their hands, sometimes wash their clothes, even to the extent of 14 to 16 hours a day for over
14 to 16 hours a day, they're just washing?
That's not the end of it. For over 10 years, we have seen 2 or 3 people of this magnitude.
How do these people, how do you live? How do you survive?
Someone else buys food, someone else sort of tolerates this sort of behavior, and this becomes the entire way of life. And if they give up even 10 minutes of that 14 hours, their anxiety wells up so they just can't even stand it.
Mary, how long were your washing situations?
It was really severe for about a year.
How long would it last at its worst?
It was a continual thing, several hours a day. You know, you'd wash, but you'd feel that you still had to keep washing, and I'd be washing and then realize that this was inappropriate, but I could not reduce the anxiety level until I washed again.
What was your husband doing during this?
Initially, he tolerated it, and then it got to a point where he just said, you know, I can't live with you if this is how it's going to be.
Were you getting him to join in any of this ritualistic
behavior? No, he refused to. He refused to. He would be outside in the yard, he would come in the house. We had a young child at the time. I would say to him, wash your hands, change your clothes, do this. And, you know, he finally said, no, I'm not going to do this. And it was very stressful for me because he was not going to go along with this behavior.
Was there anything like that for you, Sandra? Were you trying to involve the family at all?
I always try to involve my family, and also for the past year I have a boyfriend, and after a while I wanted to survive this and I wanted to function in society, and I tried every way to get around it, and he became my human sterilizer. If things dropped on the floor, he would pick it up, touch things for me, and somehow it absolved me from the guilt. That's mainly why I was washing. I felt guilty because I was contaminating other people, and I couldn't live with all this guilt.
Fran Sidney is with us in the audience. Your husband is here, too?
Yes.
What's your name?
David.
David, thanks for being here. How does your, I say this in the past tense, should I? Are these in the past tense, these disorders for you folks, or?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Some are, some aren't.
Okay.
I started at a very young age, mostly with perfectionism and trying to do well in school. And I kept telling myself it had to be done, writing over papers and so forth and so on. The more responsibility I had, the older I got, the more stress there was. It seemed to invade other areas, like no shoes in the house. Mm-hmm. Everything had to be perfectly clean, although
People couldn't walk in, they'd have
to... Although I had if they did, then I would wash the floors on my hands and knees or vacuum, whatever type of floor it was.
What were you thinking during all this?
Well, the no shoes is not unusual. I understand the Japanese people have no shoes.
One of our associate producers made us take our shoes off when we went to visit.
I found that our house as such was simply a very neat, clean home. We didn't go to really, really extremes like washing or things like that. But if you walked into our home, you knew you were in a neat, clean house.
You resented people coming in.
Yes, I felt when people came into my house that if they touched something or something was out of order, that I was coming apart inside. It felt
They were doing
like
it to you, or?
Right. It felt like what I work for Rape Crisis as well as the OCD Foundation, and it felt like what people who have been raped describe as an invasion.
Violation.
On a violation.
Let's go to the
Which
phone.
is so overwhelming that your life is not enjoyable. It's not livable.
I would imagine. How are you doing now?
Great.
It's great.
Yeah.
Does it rear its ugly head at all, or?
Oh, sure. There's remnants of it, but I would say I'm about 60% better, and that 60% gives me a chance to be productive as a person, to enjoy my life, and to work for the organization so other people can be helped.
All right. Now we have someone who's been waiting patiently for a while. Hi, you're on People Are Talking.
Yes, hello. I have a question. I was wondering if this obsessive behavior, is it hereditary at all?
Good question. Doctor?
Well, it is a good question, and as of the present time, we do not have a good answer. For a number of years now, we've been taking careful histories on all of our patients, and it is quite common to hear that another family member has this particular disorder. Also, it's quite common to hear that another family member has Tourette's disorder. And we think there's a relationship genetically to Tourette's disorder. And in fact, half of the people with Tourette's disorder also have OCD, the same kind of symptoms.
But where people with Tourette disorder at least have the comfort of knowing that they definitely have a biochemical problem, with OCD, with obsessive compulsive disorders, you're not 100% sure on that score, are you?
I think we're probably as sure that this is a biochemical disorder as we are for Tourette's disorder. There's not a clear biochemical or neurological abnormality identified in Tourette's, and we have a number of clues that there might be a chemical abnormality involved with this disorder, particularly the dramatic response to medication. Frequently, people will 60 to 90% rid of their symptoms with medication. I think Sandra is someone we've worked with, and she got rid of 80 to 90% of her symptoms with medication alone.
I'm coming over here. Mary, you're not on medication, are you?
No, I'm not, and I never was. I was very fortunate to have a very good response with about 10 behavioral therapy sessions, and it's made a dramatic difference in my life.
Do you feel it is something that it's something biochemical? The only reason I ask is because I would imagine that there is a comfort, there's some comfort, I would imagine, in knowing it's biochemical, and that if you think it's just a behavioral thing, that you might be more at fault. You know what I'm going for? That you might feel more to blame for it.
That's what helped bring me out of the closet about it and able to come on a local talk show. I'm from Marblehead, and the fact now that I know it's a chemical disorder, and if I had diabetes, I'd be taking insulin. Well, I have OCD, so I take clomipramine. And I had a lot of shame about it. I thought I was the weirdest person on earth. I didn't want to tell anybody.
I haven't had any behavior modification, and I had sort of an interesting thing. I was in a fluvoxamine protocol in Connecticut.
A what?
A fluvoxamine. It's like chloripramine. It's one of the drugs.
It's a medication.
It's very, very effective with it. And the pharmacist made a mistake and mixed the placebo. This was a controlled drug program, and mixed the placebo, the non-drug, and gave it to us instead of the fluvoxamine. So I had been getting better for 3 or 4 weeks. And then as soon as the fluvoxamine got out of our system, which we found out was 10 days, it came back with an absolute and total ferociousness.
So there was the evidence.
Yeah, the evidence was there. And then we went right back onto the fluvoxamine. And it took 3 to 4 weeks. And that was it. Once it took for me. So basically, it has a lot of components for different people.
Ask your question, and we'll have to get the answer after.
I'd like to ask the doctor, what's the difference between a ritual and compulsive behavior, and at what point does it become compulsive instead of a ritual?
Okay, and then we'll break and come back with the answer to that after this. We are back, and we had your question about, why don't you reiterate it for us?
I asked, what was the difference between a ritual and compulsive behavior?
Yeah, we all have certain habits.
Yeah, and at what point does it become compulsive? Is a 20-minute shower in the morning compulsive?
I know I said to my wife occasionally, honey, we hang the phone up like this, so the cord goes this way. Now, is that a minor case, or am I just being a nudge?
No,
I'm a nudge, okay.
You are a nudge, I've heard. I think the patients could probably give a better definition of this than me, but our medical terminology is obsessions refer to thoughts, what's going on in your head. Compulsions refer to actions, things you're actually doing, checking things, going from one place to another, or washing your hands. Rituals is more a lay term, and it doesn't have a sort of a medical definition. But there are religious rituals that are part of a religious environment that are perfectly normal. If you're doing something over and over, it doesn't make sense to you, and you don't want to be doing it, then you're probably over in the range of obsessive compulsive disorder. If you're doing something over and over, like saying the rosary, and that makes sense to you and you want to be doing it, someone who might not have that religion might look at you and say, well, that's quite bizarre to be doing that on TV. But you understand what's going on, and that's not obsessive compulsive disorder.
It's when it started. When it started to feel like it was taking over.
My disorder, in my case, see, I did not want to check the doors. I mean, once was enough. In my rational mind, I guess you could call it, normal thinking, checking something once is enough. But I couldn't do it once. I mean, I had to do it. There was something drawing me to do it. Or else anxiety, fear, overwhelming fear that something bad was going to happen to me or my family if I didn't do it. If I didn't check, I wouldn't be able to sleep.
Go ahead.
My question is, did any of you figure that at certain times in your lives that, like I know for myself, when I'm under a lot of stress with different projects due, I become very obsessive because there's so much going on in my life.
How does it manifest itself?
Through cleaning, actually. That seems to be very popular because a lot of people do that.
Yourself or cleaning your surroundings?
My surroundings.
Yeah.
I get very neurotic about my room, the bathroom, the kitchen. Everything has to sparkle and shine because I have a paper due. I'm up for a part. I have voice lessons. I have to dance. I have a lot to do. So I notice I get more stressed out and more obsessive when I'm really, really busy. Does that happen for any of you?
Well, I think there's two things that you're talking about there. You're talking about obsessive compulsive disorder, where you're driven to do these things to avoid certain situations, to avoid the physical feeling of anxiety, to avoid the things that you fear, or the kind of thing where you've got so many things going on in your life that you got to put order somewhere. And I think all of us do that. You know, it's like, okay, I got to write this paper, and your desk is an absolute mess, and you haven't started to think about what you really want to do. So you do something very mechanical and orderly, and while your mind is disengaged. But this other obsessive compulsive washing and the rest is really bizarre because you could find someone who's obsessive compulsive and a cleaner, but their house may be filthy because they're looking for a germ or an invisible thing that they have to get rid of. I know when I got into cleaning, I was afraid that people were going to get contaminated. So I would be cleaning for things that didn't exist. You know, the possibility that some pollen from this plant got here, and then I would clean. And obviously it had nothing to do with cleaning because there was nothing there.
Michael, there are a couple cases that you've dealt with in the real extreme. It seems like we'd be talking about the real extreme. We talk about 14 hours of washing, but there were a couple of really awful cases.
Well, the people we have on the program have sort of a moderate form of the illness, and if they came to me, I would suspect that each one of them would do very well with the appropriate kind of treatment. And the appropriate kind of treatment is medication or behavioral therapy. It's not traditional psychotherapy. So I think they're all in a good prognostic group, and they've all done very well with medication and or behavioral therapy. You had a collector who was... We have a couple of patients that we call hoarders. And for one woman in her mid-30s, for over a dozen years, threw nothing out of the house. All food that came into the house, cartons, urine, feces, money, bank receipts, everything was saved and piled up in piles all around the house until the whole house really reeked and the public health department had to come in.
Can you ask a person who is doing that, why are you afraid to get rid of these things? What do you think will happen if you get rid of these things?
The reason we categorize it under obsessive-compulsive disorder is that these things cover up anxiety. If she throws anything out, she becomes severely anxious and can't control her emotions and her thoughts and feels like she's going to panic or go crazy.
She must have been by herself. She must have lived alone.
She lived on one level by herself, but had two uncles living down below that bought her food and pretty much kept us going.
Let's go to the phones again. It's amazing. Hi, you're on People Are Talking.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
I have a very good friend who has OCD, and I'd like to know how I react on a daily basis to understand this, and secondly, to help him overcome it.
How is his OCD, his obsessive compulsive disorder, how is it acting up?
It has been displayed by the very frequent hand washing and by the showering. He's told me about that. And also, with an incident or two with breaking glass, I mean, I would see him sometimes freeze up. And we've talked about it in the past, and he's explained many aspects of the disease.
Okay, let's find out what can a friend do?
Well, I think just in the context of, if you have a friend that you know that does excessive washing, the main thing to do would be get them into a treatment center. You can't really come up with some simple approach without having the whole situation evaluated.
For you folks, would it have worked? Does it work to have someone say, let's get you to some help here, or do you think that...
Yeah, I think what you find out is as soon as you realize that there's something someone can do for you, you'd crawl to get help. I mean, because it's not a situation you want to live in. It has no glamour and nothing the least bit pleasant about it.
Okay, Dan?
I think you need treatment because no matter what anybody tells you to do, you can't stop.
How are you doing now? How's it going for you now?
Fairly well, I would say about 70%. I still have the obsessions, but they're not taking complete control over my life. The anxiety has dissipated, and the obsessions don't last as long as they used to.
Back here, go.
We hear so much about anxiety and normal stress. Is that the precursor to this disease? Does it manifest itself that way, and then, or does it come on all at once? Like one year you wake up, or one day it's all of a sudden...
Let's hold on that, because one, we have to break, and two, it gets fairly involved, because depending on the type of OCD you have, the way it tends to creep up on you is different too, and I want to get into that after this. While you were watching the commercial, weren't you? I was talking to Mary, who is in shadow, and she said she's tried to get in on this a few times. So we'll go right to you, Mary, as soon as we answer the question that we went to the commercial with, and that is, does this happen as a result of the stress that we all deal with, and some people just, it triggers a whole different reaction?
There's no easy answer. Probably in the last 10 years, I've seen about 550, 600 people with this disorder, and sometimes some people can give you a specific event when it started, such as World War II, a bomb hit the house next door, and they started and kept this up for 40 years. That's relatively unusual. People can tell you within a few months when they think it started, but it often sort of sneaks up on you. That would be the more usual way.
Okay.
Not necessarily associated with any major trauma.
Mary?
What I wanted to say before was that in terms of the anxiety level, I asked the behavioral therapist to give me an analogy to pass along to my husband that he could identify with, and he asked me to have him envision going out in the backyard late at night to check on something, and all of a sudden feeling someone put a gun to his head, and to imagine the anxiety level that you would feel if you were in that situation. That is how high it is for people that suffer from this disorder. And in behavioral therapy, you learn to be able to, by not participating in, the behavior that is problemsome, you eventually decrease that level of anxiety and realize that if you don't wash your hands, it's okay, nothing bad is really going to happen.
Okay, Debbie, you just wanted to make the point, it's not all hand washing and checking.
It's not all hand washing and checking, right. A lot of people have fear of doing harm to other people. For instance, I know some lady who she couldn't even keep her knives in her house to cut something because she was afraid she was going to kill the person with a knife.
Has he had any history of violence at all?
No, not at all. He'll never do anything what it says you're going to do. But I know a fact from the foundation that a lot of the people that write in have a very strong fear about harming people, and they'll never do it.
Okay. Will they never do it, or might there be something?
No.
I have never known anybody to act on one of these fears, and in fact, they're usually the most gentle, kind people who in their wildest fantasy would never do anything like this. That's why it's so terrifying to them. Let me just make one point. We now know fairly sophisticated epidemiologic studies have pointed out that about 1% to 2% of the population have this disorder.
That's about as many as schizophrenia, isn't it?
More than schizophrenia. 4 or 5 million people.
Then why don't we hear more about this?
Well, you will now.
It's an unrecognized disorder. People associated with normal activities. She's very clean. She's very neat. She's very tidy.
You can pass
She's very careful.
Yeah.
Well, I have a sibling that I have been afraid of since I was a small child, and she was younger than I was. I'm one of 3 sisters. I'm the middle one, but the oldest one's Stammer.
What does she do?
She threatens. She yelled. She screamed. She got her own way all the time, and I always had to back off. And I'm wondering what all this anger does. Could this be the problem, or does it sound like obsessive compulsive, like we hear about in Overeaters Anonymous? She's gone now from being, regular weight to she's really obese at her age.
Okay.
So, is it similar, or is there help out there for people who are really in this denial?
Well, that is definitely not obsessive compulsive disorder. Mm-hmm. That's a different sort of problem. That is a behavior manifested anger. There could be 50 different causes for that, and that would really take a sort of a thorough psychiatric evaluation.
Is the caller still there? Hello, you're on the air.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Tom, I'd like to know whether this is compulsive obsessive behavior or not. I can identify with a lot of things that I've just heard. But I type out, not on a typewriter, but with my fingers and with my mind, everything that I hear or see, or if there's nothing going on, the thoughts in my mind. And I cannot stop myself from doing this.
Let me make sure I'm clear. So everything that you think, you see it like it's being typed on a screen?
Yeah, I miss a lot on a television program because I'm typing everything I hear.
Just mentally, not physically?
Just when my fingers are moving and in my head, yes.
Okay, all right. Language, that element of that not being able to break herself from that particular imagery?
Well, what she's describing is a ritual that she does over and over that she does not want to do, I understand, and it causes her distress. That would be considered probably obsessive-compulsive disorder, just as a simple answer. You'd obviously need to know more to...
To the caller, have you ever had this, have you ever talked to anyone about this? Has this ever been diagnosed for you?
Yeah, I have also been diagnosed as an agoraphobic, and my doctor says that there is nothing in this country that can, no medication anyway, in this country that can help me with he calls it obsessive-compulsive behavior.
Well, we're here to tell you that's not necessarily true.
That's the misunderstanding. Yeah. That's the problem. That a lot of people don't know that there is help available. There is medication available. There are treatment centers available.
But to hear that from a doctor, well, that's almost like a death sentence.
Well, that's a real problem.
I strongly feel that you need the medicine to help you, because I think all the therapy in the world will never get you better. I've been to therapy for 14 years, and without the medicine, I never would have been better.
Tom?
Because I think it's a predisposition.
All of us have formed a group. There's a group of us here from Connecticut called the OCD Foundation. And basically the impetus to start this group was that all of us went places looking for help, and we went to practicing psychiatrists and practicing psychologists, and all of us have been through a route that was thorny and rocky and really didn't need to have happen.
Can I hate to rush this, but we are almost out of time, and I want to make sure we get the information out. This is, we have in the office, as we always do, the resource information that pertains to that day's show. So you can call this number, 787-7109, and we will give you the information about how to get in touch with the OCD Foundation in Connecticut. They, in turn, will send you this question and answer booklet and also other information. Now, they are a nonprofit organization. It would help if you sent at least the postage, if you sent a self-addressed stamped envelope. But it would be even better if you wanted to kick in $1 or $2 to help defray the cost of this. We will again have the address in the office. Let me give it to you quickly, however. It's the OCD Foundation Incorporated, Post Office Box 6060 in Vernon, Connecticut, and the zip code is 06066. And again, that address, for those of you who couldn't jot it down, will be in the office. And in the few seconds that we have remaining, that woman who called in, it's staggering to me that she would go to a doctor and he would say, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. You're on your own.
That's happened to all of us.
It's happened to all of you?
All of us. I've been to a doctor and he gave me medications and told me there was no help. I went to the treatment center we go to, Connecticut Mental Health, and they gave me this medication and I feel great.
All right.
The OCD Foundation will send treatment centers, the names of treatment centers nearest these people, and they can contact them.
We are out of time for this segment. We have something pertaining to tomorrow's show, a special edition of People Are Talking, coming up in about a minute or so. I want to applaud you all. Mary, thank you, all of you, for what no doubt will be an inspirational time and informational. Thank you much. We'll be right back with more after this.
With Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters.
Tonight, they do it, they don't know why.
I'd open doors with napkins. She washed her hands about 70 times a day.
Obsessive cleaning, compulsive hand washing, strange, often destructive behavior they cannot stop.
I would say, God, you know, what are you doing to me?
They thought they were crazy, but John Stossel reveals it's an illness with a